There's an interesting phenomenon in cinema known as the twin film. Two movies developed independently but sharing remarkably similar ideas, often released within months of each other. Sometimes it's coincidence, other times direct competition, with studios fielding thousands of thematically overlapping screenplays each year. The late 90s produced a particularly memorable run of them: Dante's Peak and Volcano, Deep Impact and Armageddon, and A Bug's Life and Ants. It's within this same stretch of Hollywood déjà vu that we find 1998's Dead Man on Campus. Produced by MTV Productions, it arrived almost simultaneously with Dead Man's Curve, a film similar enough in premise and name that it was swiftly retitled The Curve in some territories. The urban legend behind both films was the so-called dead roommate clause, a rumour that circulated on college campuses claiming a student would automatically receive straight A's if their roommate died during the semester. Neither film went on to set the box office ablaze, but Dead Man on Campus, which leans harder into the farcical, has since built a cult following and remains something of a curious time capsule. It stars Tom Everett Scott as Josh Miller, a student at Delman College, alongside Mark Paul Gosselaar as Cooper, his bong-obsessed roommate. While Cooper comes from a wealthy background, with his priorities focused elsewhere, Josh is a smart, studious type with a serious ambition in the field of medicine. Josh soon meets Rachel, played by Poppy Montgomery, with the two hitting it off immediately and sleeping together soon after. Swayed by Rachel and Cooper's influence, Josh starts to realise that college can actually be quite fun. As a result, his ability to focus on his academic studies begins to suffer, and his scholarship, which requires him to maintain a B average, becomes jeopardised. During a night out, Josh and Cooper discover an apparent loophole in the college rules. If your roommate dies by their own willful act, you automatically receive straight A's. Josh initially wants nothing to do with Cooper's plan to find somebody suitable to qualify and dorm with them, but with his future plans now on the line, he eventually goes along with it. What begins as a desperate attempt to save their grades soon spirals into a series of elaborate schemes as Josh and Cooper attempt to manipulate a string of prospective roommates into offing themselves, with increasingly chaotic consequences. On the surface, Dead Man on Campus appears to be very much a late 90s stoner comedy, yet one which departs from some of the more cliched aspects of the college setting. Rather than boys chasing their first time, scheming to throw the ultimate frat party, or going on bizarre road trips, it deals with genuinely dark subject matter. It's a premise which ought not to work within the confines of a college farce, and to this day would no doubt ruffle the feathers of a more sensitive audience. Arguably, a film like this couldn't even be made now, and could only have existed under the banner of a production house like MTV, which was hardly shy about presenting itself as cool and edgy. What is striking in retrospect is that this was backed by a major studio at all, particularly given the way it treats suicide and mental illness with such a knowing, almost cartoonish lack of sensitivity. That shock only deepens as the film progresses, growing increasingly cavalier about mental health and vulnerability. Our protagonists, if indeed you can call them that, stake out a mental hospital looking for prospective victims, while at another point they attempt to persuade a student to call a suicide hotline, essentially treating the possibility of suicide as a practical problem to be engineered rather than something remotely deserving of empathy. There are also recurring homosexuality gags sitting alongside the film's general willingness to use various forms of discomfort as the basis for comedy. One could argue that humour comes from the darkest corners of our psyche, a notion that's been proven time and again, but it does leave Dead Man on Campus's moral compass dangerously close to the boundaries of good taste. And yet, it's often very funny. There's an uncomfortable irony in the fact that the more morally reprehensible Josh and Cooper's behaviour becomes, the more consistently entertaining the film is. This is largely down to a core cast of characters whose narcissistic traits wouldn't see them out of place in an episode of Seinfeld or It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia. Morally skewed perceptions that dare to challenge audience expectations. It's perhaps ripe enough material for its stars to take the gamble and see it through. The picture is lined with familiar faces, most prominent of course being Mark Paul Gosselaar as Cooper, doing something that's the complete antithesis of the clean-cut image associated with his earlier television work. Here he presents a fundamentally likeable but increasingly desperate ne'er-do-well with few ethical scruples. Tom Everett Scott meanwhile keeps it largely straight as a lovable goof whose naivety is gradually eroded by Cooper's impressionable philosophy. But it's through the supporting cast that most of the humour peaks, despite sitting on the cusp of bad taste and moral decency. Lachlan Monroe, however, steals the show as Cliff O'Malley, an unhinged cartoon-like character with the death wish, whose escapades range from harassing students and hanging off window ledges to engaging in high-speed chases with the police. Randy Pearlstein's Buckley taps right into that lone gunman vibe, while Corey Page's Matt Noonan entertains as a pretentious rock prick with a penchant for shitty soap operas. There are also early appearances from Jason Segel and Linda Cardinelli, who'd later co-star together in Paul Feig's celebrated Freaks and Geeks. Its pedigree is perhaps what makes it all the more interesting then. Mike White also marks his feature screenwriting debut here, co-writing alongside Anthony Abrams, Adam Larson Broder, and Michael Traeger, making it somewhat unclear who's responsible for certain creative choices, while Alan Cohn marks his feature directorial debut. Cohn would only direct one more film, making this a relatively obscure starting point for a filmmaker who briefly found himself working within the major studio system. Controversy aside, Dead Man on Campus remains an entertaining slice of late 90s stoner comedy. Its premise is obviously problematic by contemporary standards, but that's also part of what makes it an interesting time capsule. The unusual writing partnership helps, as does an alternative soundtrack pulling from Blur, Elastica, Supergrass, Marilyn Manson, and the Dust Brothers. Really though, it's a product of a major studio system still willing to gamble on strange mid-budget comedies like this. A willingness that perhaps has ceased to exist.